The number one mistake to make right now is to assume that Red Bull will keep on dominating. Because I believe that the next F1 Grand Prix will decide where the season goes, and I'm really excited. I would have a glass of milk with me right now, but I drank it, and so you know, it was whole milk. Based on what we saw at the Miami Grand Prix, I reckon that the total domination of one man and one team is beginning to come to a close, but that the entire grid can close in on each other. Convergence will happen. Results will be extremely close. Q1 will be separated by under half a second. It'll get that tight. All in the pursuit to knock Red Bull off their perch before they do it themselves from within. Because some of these tactics are through the traditional methods of upgrades and track preference, because we gotta be really looking forward to McLaren because Lando Norris is really good around Imola and he does like this car. And also it then goes towards the lesser desirable methods like mind games and saying, I pilfered more staff members than you. Oh yeah, well, I've taken hundreds of people from you. And then people going, that person left, oh, it's gonna fall down. I think we're sick and tired of this, aren't we? We've heard the phrase brain drain so many times this week, my god. Can you guess who started that? Yes, it was Toto and Christian. Anyway, the typical reason why I'm excited about this track, and why I feel quite optimistic about the first of 2 races in Italy, is that the top 3 teams have all got something ready to show us. I think it's quite obvious with McLaren. They're gonna have the upgrades on both cars, and what we saw in Miami was incredibly optimistic. And Oscar Piastri alone, being able to keep up somewhat with the RB20 in a half upgraded car, I can't wait to see him in the full fat version. And as for Lando, like I said, he loves this track and he loves this car. Oh, it's going to be good. And on top of McLaren getting more data on their US upgrades as well, Red Bull are reportedly bringing something to the table for the weekend as well. The extent of these upgrades is not quite known yet, and they really do need to get a wiggle on, because I think for the first time in a while, these upgrades could not come soon enough. I remember last year when they kept bringing upgrades when they didn't really need to, that every single time it would knock down their lap times by 2 or 3 tenths or something, and we'd all collectively go, oh, come on, really? Do you really need these upgrades? Well, right now, I do think they need them. These tweaks are probably necessary to keep Max and Red Bull ahead. And even though Adrian Newey mentioned that the Suzuka upgrades weren't necessary and they probably could have won the Grand Prix anyway, I do feel like they were necessary, because if we hadn't seen that, then we probably would have seen Ferrari be even closer. And had there been some kind of safety car or some kind of mistake from either team, it could have swayed it in a different direction. It still feels weird though that Adrian Newey's not going to be working at Red Bull anymore. There are adults out there that have only known Adrian Newey at Red Bull. It's clear that whatever they're going to be bringing, it's gotta be big. It's gotta be significant. Because when you look at this chart of parts brought across all of the different races so far, Red Bull and Ferrari have been relatively lacking. We're gonna talk about Ferrari in a moment, but as for Red Bull, they've not really brought that many parts. Since Suzuka, well, nothing. And then we saw Miami, McLaren brought basically everything. Granted, that's mainly down to a lack of necessity in bringing tons of bits for the RB20. But given that McLaren practically brought a B-spec car to Miami, even that's not going to be their biggest upgrade this year. They had no idea it was going to be that good. The team should start to think about what their upgrade path is this year, and that maybe some parts that are track specific should be rushed through development a little bit quicker, instead of just taking their time. And that maybe towards the end of the season and maybe next season, we might start to see the effects of Adrian Newey not being there take hold. And as I mentioned in my previous video, Red Bull have been very keen to downplay the idea of Adrian leaving, and that, oh, they've got plenty of people who are experienced engineers that can take over what Adrian started, and that, oh, Adrian wasn't really doing much anyway. If you go back to a quote that Pierre Vacher, the current technical director of Red Bull, said, that Adrian Newey was effectively irreplaceable for the fact that he was able to give a different viewpoint and just go, oh, did you think of that, by the way? Oh, you didn't? I want to do that. That is gold dust, and why Vacher and his team valued Adrian so much, even if he didn't do much. And also, Newey said there's not really much for Red Bull to discover now, that diminishing returns could easily be a thing, whereas all of the other teams, there's more room to grow, more room to improve. Maybe a different viewpoint to try and find something completely different that Red Bull had not found yet. So let's just see what happens next year, but I think this year's going to be relatively sound. But the main meat of this topic here is what Ferrari are bringing to the table, and why I've decided to make an entire video dedicated to this specifically, instead of lumping it into my predictions video for the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix, which you can find out more about next week by subscribing to this channel. Ferrari are bringing what they call their 2.0 version of the SF24, which was already a very impressive machine born from the Project 676 blueprints from last year, and nobody would stop talking about. According to Fred Vasseur, the Ferrari team principal, all the teams up and down the grid, not just Red Bull, are starting to reach the limits of what these rules could provide in terms of performance. The ceiling is getting closer and closer and closer, so you really have to think outside the box, and also find out what is worth prioritizing, considering that the rules are going to be changing in a couple of years. But by them completely changing their concept for this year, it allowed them to gain more scope for opportunities to find extra time, and that is seemingly what they have found. Supposedly, according to Formula Uno, upwards of 3 or 4 tenths per lap has been found in this one upgrade package alone. Now, many people last time out were confused as to why Ferrari didn't bring upgrades, considering that McLaren did, and that Ferrari would flounder. Well, it turns out they didn't. They did fairly well. We got Leclerc on the podium, and now we can start to see why they chose to save everything for Imola. And it's all to do with delivery and feedback loops. Considering where Imola is in Italy, it's a bit of a no-brainer because Maranello is only about an hour or two away from the track and just a straight shot down the E45. If you want to get some good data from a particular part, go back to the factory and then try and manufacture a 3D printed part within record time, you just gotta get it on a truck or a van and deliver it to the track within maybe a couple of hours of even just saying, yeah, can you make that part for me, please? Thanks to Sam Collins in his Tech Talk video, we saw McLaren had done just that they had manufactured a 3D printed part on the back in terms of cooling, and it somehow worked. And you gotta love Sam Collins, man. He's such a really good thinker and a good observer. Ferrari could easily look through the Friday practice data and then just see what's worth changing and what isn't worth changing, whether or not they can come up with a last-minute fix if it's not just quite there yet. But maybe they might not need to. Because another thing that is helping them immensely is that they have their own track, Fiorano. Yes, of course, this is nothing new. They've had Fiorano for decades. But it's a constant reminder to everyone, even Red Bull, that Ferrari has an insurmountable amount of data behind them, as well as correlation. And also a tactic that many other teams will probably be exploiting in the years to come, considering the allocation has been vastly increased. Filming days. Yes, all of that stuff that you've heard about over the years where many teams just treated it as a bit of an also-ran event where they can just take out a drone around and make it look really cool for their corporate sponsors to use in their advertisements, like Juniper Networks did all the time with Aston Martin and had Seb winking in my face day in, day out. Okay, I'm not exactly mad with Seb winking in my general direction, but you get the idea. And it was also a really good opportunity for the FIA to use Ferrari's cars to prototype rain covers for the wheels to reduce spray, and potentially go racing in wet conditions without either having to bring out the safety car or halt the racing and wait hours to resume, if at all. And yes, think what you will, but we gotta remember, these wheel covers are just prototypes. These wheel covers, if they were painted yellow, totally do not make the red Ferrari look like that car came straight from Noddy's Toyland. Freddy, Freddy, the man with a little red and yellow car. Sorry. You get 200 kilometers nowadays instead of 100 to take your brand new car, the current car, around a track and get all the footage that you need. It's basically enough for you to give a shakedown and get an overall feeling and impressions as to whether or not these upgrades even work. And that's exactly what they did, and probably saved them a copious amount of time in free practice 1. According to Ferrari, they did consider doing all of this in Barcelona because that's what you did, either that or Bahrain, but they decided to use Fiorano instead because even though they got plenty of data when it comes to previous Ferrari cars and they can compare, the difference is that Fiorano has information about the base SF24. It's all about that base, and I think that's perfectly genius, and that it shows that Ferrari mean business here. And especially they mean business, though, because they made sure that Xavi will no longer be saying in the radio, "We are checking," because he's been moved on to a different department. He's no longer Charles Leclerc's engineer. But using Fiorano is very important because you want some good on-track data as well as off-track data in the wind tunnel, and making sure that your correlation is just right and peachy. Something that Mercedes has been struggling with as of late, them not really matching up, and Haas has been struggling in a different way in that it doesn't match up in a good way because it's faster on the track instead of the wind tunnel. I don't know. And Haas has got major upgrades too, as do Aston Martin supposedly. So this is making me think that more and more of these teams, instead of just blazing through their filming day allocation in Bahrain in one go, they will instead be very tactical when it comes to it. That maybe they might do a little bit of it in Bahrain to begin with, and then maybe if they got a big upgrade package coming down the line, they'll save it and go and do some more filming days. Maybe not too much on the single day, but they'll spread it out over the course of the season. Just try and make good use, because there's also the cost cap. Every single upgrade has to work, or at least not fail and make it worse. As a result though, I think Imola is going to be an acid test as to where this season goes. I could be wrong, absolutely. And if you're a Red Bull fan, you could easily come back to this video and tell me how wrong I am. But I feel like there is something really interesting going down here. The diminishing returns for Red Bull are very valid. They know it themselves. Ferrari and McLaren have got something good here. McLaren in Miami were just absolutely fantastic, even though they didn't expect to be that good. Ferrari didn't expect to be that good in Miami either. They're now bringing everything to the table, a 2.0 SF24, which was already described for the longest time as the second fastest car on the grid. That is spicy. We don't know the extent of the Red Bull response. It could be really good. It might be just an upgrade or two. Or they might bring rushed parts and therefore they might not work properly, or they don't have enough data and correlation in the wind tunnel. We don't know. This unpredictability, this uncertainty. How is Max Verstappen going to respond to Lando Norris winning his first Grand Prix, and now he's going to a track where he's gotten podiums almost every single year? It's crazy good. Even if the Milton Keynes team are still the fastest, if the gap is within a couple of tenths of the teams behind them, that's still enough peril and intrigue to force Max, Checo and the crew to work harder than in recent months, or mistakes might start occurring. And it also might mean that we might see Max actually using all of his power, that he might not get bored anymore like he did in China, where he admitted that at the last corner in Shanghai, he then drifted it because he just wanted to see whether he could do it. I don't mind if Red Bull and Verstappen still win the titles, but as long as the other teams can catch up and ensure some sense of jeopardy and take some more wins away from Red Bull, pegging the gap to Max to single figures over a whole race distance without a safety car, that'd be great. Oh, sorry, I really shouldn't mention safety cars. Ah! The Warlord! Ah! Do you want to know what's even better though? Because the Imola track, it's had an upgrade. Or a downgrade. But in reality, it's a very big upgrade. 2024 is set to resemble the San Marino Grand Prix of old. And I know it's called the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix, loads of sponsors, and it turns into complete word salad if I'm honest. It's going old school in terms of the overall layout. There are going to be more gravel traps. Thanks to F1 Fan 2004, 3 of the corners around the circuit have been spotted to have had some changes. Don't worry, they've not changed the configuration of the track or the layout, that's still remaining solid. What's happening is what's going on around of it, because if you notice from these images, there is considerably less amounts of runoff, and instead, we've gone back to what there was before. Either a reduced asphalt runoff, or we've got gravel traps again, especially around Acqua Minerale and the small tight chicane of Gresini. In short, the track's gone back to what it looked like back in the 2000s when Fernando Alonso and Michael Schumacher were tussling it out in 2005 and 6. Oh, I can't tell you how happy I am. If only they had the original last corner again, it would be perfect. I hope this is a trend that continues, that we start seeing more gravel traps coming back, especially the ones that are not all that deep, like at Spa. They are just about shallow enough to allow the cars to escape, but also enough to deter anybody from going wide. And we will never see what happened at Spielberg last year, where you got hundreds and hundreds of laps deleted because everyone wanted to take the last corner flat out. That was an embarrassment. And we also saw this working in China, because that last corner where Verstappen drifted, if he had gone that little bit wider, there was a gravel trap there instead of a runoff. And then he would have probably had the same situation that Carlos Sainz demonstrated. And the last thing to get intrigued about regarding this Grand Prix, or at least a little bit frustrated by, is what's going on with the top 3 teams away from the circuit. Even though Christian Horner has been quick to make Adrian Newey's departure not that big of a deal, my wife brought this to my attention, that he mentioned that Adrian Newey was a pillar of the organisation. The brain drain at Red Bull could start to gather pace, as nobody thought Newey would leave, not after 2 decades when the man is approaching his late 60s. And it's also understood another pillar could be considering his options, that of the sporting director, Jonathan Wheatley. If you're not all that familiar with the name, you might recognise him being on the pit wall. GP Blog supposes that Audi could make him their team principal under Andreas Seidel's oversight. Shamrock Studios on Reddit then goes to suggest a point that I agree with, that given that Newey is departing, a hugely paid staff member has quit, meaning that perhaps a chance to ask for a raise might happen. Everybody's salaries are limited to a certain point, except the top 3 highest paid members of staff, one of them being Adrian Newey, who was paid a cool 10 mil a year. And considering he was taking a back seat in recent years, at least according to Horner, I imagine that maybe Jonathan Wheatley, who is a high figure within the team, especially in the paddock, might want to take up Newey's place as one of the top 3 highest paid Red Bull members. And if that isn't forthcoming, then perhaps another team might give him that. Wheatley is a very significant member of the team who quietly sets about strategies and communicates with the FIA regularly. He would make a good team principal. Then you gotta remember McLaren's acquisition last year of Rob Marshall, Red Bull's former chief engineering officer, and Dan Fallows to Aston Martin, many of whom considered him to be a protege of Newey's, and even though he's had a bit of a troubled time as of late with the AMR24, you cannot take away the AMR23 and how good that was at the beginning. Just a shame about Kanda and the other driver. Even though Dan Fallows and Rob Marshall and Jonathan Wheatley don't have the same star power as Newey, these are 3 key members of the Red Bull train that started off this fantastic movement in the ground effect era. Them going, they're big names, more could follow. And you don't need me to tell you, team personnel are changing teams all the time. This is nothing new. It's happened before, and it will continue to happen. But at the same time, it's become a really big bone of contention between Toto and Christian. Their continuing feud growing ever more pace and ever more steam. First, it was talking about Max Verstappen going to Mercedes or not. Now it's talking about how many people have either left the team or gone to a team. Mercedes keep going, oh, we've managed to pull in 1 or 2 members of key Red Bull personnel. And then Christian Horner goes, oh yeah, Toto, well, how about the 220 members of staff that we've signed over from Mercedes because your car is so bad because you haven't changed it? Well, I haven't really checked the emails. We might have actually got a 3rd member of Red Bull coming over from us. So there, Christian. Seriously, this drama is putting the 2022 clip from Drive to Survive to shame. These 2 are in hot water for different reasons. One is trying to find the next silver bullet for the Silver Arrows, either through getting Max Verstappen and Helmut Marko, or getting Kimi Antonelli, and the other is currently dealing with a power struggle and also dealing with lots of allegations and investigations going down, which has destabilized the Red Bull juggernaut. And Zach Brown's now decided to wade in, saying that, oh, all of this happening? Oh, it's serious trouble behind the scenes at Red Bull. A domino effect could occur. It could easily happen. Zach Brown's arguments are valid because they're its president. It happened at Mercedes over the course of 21 and 22. It probably happened after Michael and Ross Brawn left Ferrari in the 2000s. It happens. All because people are allured by the desire of getting a better paid job, a better status job, a new challenge, something new. And considering that the majority of F1 teams are based around the same area of Oxfordshire, it's not really that big of a change. You just have to change which motorway or which road you go down. And it's not like Ferrari are immune. Just look at what they're doing. Fred Vasseur, John Elkann, the chairman of Ferrari, they're just splashing the cash for everybody. And again, Fred Vasseur, Andreas Seidel, they are hiring everybody from up and down the grid. It's getting really, really intense here, considering we're going into a brand new development cycle for 2026. Everybody's picking and choosing where they're going to go, not just the drivers. You got to remember that. We could have completely different members of staff in just a year or 2. This is no joke. A seriously big employee at a particular team going to another team could be enough for some of the lesser and junior employees to think, you know what, I like that guy. I'm going to go over there as well. And then it just follows, it repeats, it cycles, it's nothing new. So pay close attention to this, my friend. It may not transform things for a team overnight, but next year could be interesting. And I think the Grand Prix next week at Imola could be even more interesting. If it proves to be the case that Red Bull's domination may be at least a little bit challenged, we could have a fun season this time, after a couple of years of the Dutch national anthem. But honestly, I would rather these teams settle it on the track rather than social media or he said, she said, they said, whatever. That's not really what we're here for in terms of Formula One. Even though it does make for some good content, I would rather actually be talking about race reviews and what people did on the circuit and overtakes. That is my jam. But one good thing to come out of this is that, hey, at least the era of asphalt runoffs might be coming toward an end, finally, and it might mean that Red Bull's domination might be coming to an end. They may still be the fastest car, but at least the others might be able to give them a challenge. And it could also be the end of Aston Martin's grip on 5th place if their upgrades for Imola don't work, and Racing Bulls can capitalise on their good form in Miami, and having 2 drivers finally getting into a good groove. To find out why I think the green team should be really paying close attention to the second Red Bull team instead of Mercedes, go and hop over to this video here, and I will tell you a very compelling argument, which honestly does not bag on Lance Stroll most of the time.